Previously on Werezilla's Retrospective.
Being a popular movie, it naturally got a sequel, The Lost World. No, not that one. That one. There we go. It was a decent movie, flawed but decent, despite what some people will tell you.
Welcome to Werezilla's Retrospective. I'm your host, Werezilla, and you're probably thinking, that intro demands an explanation, the least of which being, what does he have to do with any of the Jurassic Park sequels? If you ever wanted to know why the 1990s was chock full of dinosaur-related media, it is without question because of the film adaptation of Jurassic Park. It made dinosaurs so popular that the original book's author, Michael Crichton, wrote a sequel, something he said he would never do. The reason he wrote a sequel was so Steven Spielberg would have material to work with when making the sequel to the film. And he used the book. Kinda. Crichton's Lost World and Spielberg's The Lost World Jurassic Park have a few of the same characters and events taking place on the same island inhabited by dinosaurs, but all sorts of behind-the-scenes changes during production, especially during the film's third act, led to the book and film being largely separate entities from one another. If you ask me, I think both the book and movie have a lot of nuance that can lead to some interesting conversation. Unfortunately, one of the most popular faces on the internet disagrees. Back in 2011, the Nostalgia Critic released his review of The Lost World, and it was one of the earliest times I can think of where I watched the video and thought, are you sure this is the hot take you want to go with? To make things abundantly clear, the worst thing about Channel Awesome is the awful way it treated its employees, but that's a much more serious topic that's already been well documented. Instead, this video is going to be addressing the critiques made by Doug Walker that make this movie sound worse than it truly is. This is something I plan on doing with at least a few of my upcoming reviews. Is it my place to do such a thing? It's no secret he was a big influence on my channel, especially in year one. I was one of many people watching him and thought, yeah, I could do that, which might explain why the critic's style was as popular as it was. But I'd like to think I've moved on from this review style since looking back on it, this requires downplaying or outright ignoring parts of a movie that work. Are there movies out there that are not good? Of course there are, but the Nostalgia Critic method exaggerates the flaws of movies in large part for the sake of humor, regardless of quality, which is when it stops being funny and starts being ignorant more than anything else. But don't worry, we won't be spending this entire video going, Doug was wrong about this and Doug was wrong about that. The Lost World gives us so much more to talk about beyond what he has to say about the movie. Let us begin.
Carnivores hunt on game trails. Do you want to set up base camp or a buffet?
One thing I won't be covering in this review is some of the scientific inaccuracies in this movie and the franchise as a whole. Jurassic Park ensured we would be seeing dinosaur fiction for the rest of time. It changed the public's perception of their overall look and behavior, making some species like velociraptors mainstream dinos that everybody knows the names of. This also means there's quite a bit of 1990s science that is now outdated, which can sometimes lead to misinformation about dinosaurs today. By now we know the film's method of cloning dinosaurs by extracting DNA from fossilized amber wouldn't work because DNA can't be preserved for millions of years. Also, the dinosaur's appearance and behavior won't be too heavily scrutinized either. You know, things like not having feathers and such. Funny story actually, scientific inaccuracies is something at least one of our main characters is trying to resolve.
Robert Burke said the T-Rex was a rogue who would abandon its young at the earliest opportunity. I know I can prove otherwise.
And yet another one of our side characters is a paleontologist who resembles real-life paleontologist Jack Horner, and says a few inaccurate things. But because of when the film was made, I can't tell if it's supposed to be ignorance. Also, at least one other character has a hard time saying the dinosaurs' names, but that's a character being wrong, not the movie.
Really? You hire people to hunt dinosaurs who don't even know the names of the dinosaurs?
That is an intentional choice in order to characterize the guy, not stupidity on the film's part. I mean, he comes up with his own nicknames like calling the Pachycephalosaurus Friar Tuck and a Parasaurolophus Elvis. Would you rather him dryly say those names during this scene or something more unique? Yeah, he makes a lot of stupid observations like this in the review. Anyway, The Lost World Jurassic Park makes an interesting choice in its opening scene. Instead of adapting a scene from the new book made for the film, it instead adapts a scene from the original Jurassic Park novel, which was left out of that film.
That's chaos theory.
A rich family docks their yacht on an island InGen is keeping their dinosaurs, and a little girl is attacked by compies.
What is carried over is the return of Ian Malcolm. He actually died of his injuries in the Jurassic Park novel, and in order to bring him back in the Lost World, Crichton took a simple approach.
Well, it just so happens that your friend here is only mostly dead.
Since he didn't die in the original movie, no explanation is needed here. Though maybe Malcolm wishes he did die because in the intervening years between Jurassic Park and the Lost World, InGen tried to cover up the events of the first movie, Malcolm spoke out against them, and they ruined his reputation, making it understandable when he's disturbed by John Hammond revealing the existence of his second island, Isla Sorna, where the dinosaurs were originally cloned, where there are no electric fences, and instead they're allowed to roam free. And to save his company after the incident with the little girl, Hammond wants Malcolm to lead a team to document the dinosaurs on the island. For whatever reason, the Nostalgia Critic sounded incredulous over there being a second island. Sorna may not have been mentioned in the first movie, but it doesn't contradict anything. The critic calls it a plot hole, but word to the wise, incredulity is not a plot hole. Anyway, Malcolm wants nothing to do with the expedition until he learns his girlfriend Sarah is already on Sorna. However, once the team gets there, things get complicated when a larger team of hunters arrive to take some of the dinosaurs off the island. What does Hammond's nephew and successor as head of InGen, Peter Ludrow, plan on doing with these dinosaurs? Taking the concept of Jurassic Park and downsizing it.
You don't bring people halfway around the world to visit a zoo. You bring the zoo to them.
This movie's antagonist is a fun bit of corporate satire. He boasts about how he won't make the same mistake as Hammond, doing what any company would do when they want to salvage a bad situation by making a smaller scale spin-off of the original as a way of making some kind of profit and generating good publicity. Unlike Malcolm, who thinks humanity and dinosaurs shouldn't interact at all, Ludrow thinks he can make his plans for Jurassic Park San Diego work, and yet it falls apart before it can come to fruition for him too.
Now you're John Hammond.
That's right. Now you're John Hammond. I didn't even know we were supposed to hate him by this point, but ooh, I hate him now!
Oh, talk about missing the forest for the trees. That was meant to be payoff for this scene.
Thing is, in Jurassic Park the novel, Hammond was the closest thing the book had to a human antagonist. While the movies toned this down a lot to make him a nicer person, that doesn't mean he's unwilling to do unscrupulous things to achieve his goals. Nowhere is this more apparent with how he hired Vince Vaughn's character in this movie, Nick Van Owen. At first he appears to be a laid-back individual who's just looking for a paycheck. But when Ludrow's men start capturing dinosaurs, he reveals the reason Hammond hired him was to sabotage the hunters' efforts, leading to a scene where he and Sarah free the captured dinosaurs, which run amok and destroy all the hunters' equipment. And even though the head hunter, Roland Tembo, goes out of his way to help our heroes when their trailers go over a cliff, that doesn't stop Nick from stealing the bullets out of his gun. So when the T-Rex buck attacks the hunters and Roland has no ammo, he has to tranquilize the buck instead, leading to even more people dying when the buck is brought to San Diego. Nick is basically responsible for most of the deaths in this movie, and it's why he's seen as one of the worst aspects of the movie by many viewers. But here's the thing. I don't think he was ever intended to be a sympathetic character. Yes, he's technically one of the movie's protagonists, but Nick is clearly not a good person, nor is the audience meant to see him as one. As if we needed to make this more clear.
I know you. You're that Earth First bastard, aren't you?
Earth First is a radical environmentalist group that believes nature should be preserved regardless of human progress, leading them to do crazy things like blocking roadways, tying themselves to trees, sabotaging dams and ski lodges, and even taking over logging facilities in an attempt to stop them from harming the environment, harming plenty of people along the way.
What I'm getting at here is that we shouldn't be surprised when the environmental terrorist starts acting like an environmental terrorist.
Should he have gotten some comeuppance for his actions? Perhaps that would have been more satisfying. The Nostalgia Critic comes down pretty hard on this character because of how many people get killed because of him, and most viewers certainly think Nick should have died during this movie. It doesn't help that a much more heroic character, Eddie, dies a very gruesome death. Plus, the hunters have Roland, a badass dedicated to hunting the T-Rex buck. Not to mention losing people on the trip, such as his hunting partner Ajay, leads him to retiring from hunting after he's caught the buck, deciding he's had enough of what he calls the company of death. There was even a deleted scene where he would have been first introduced on the mainland prior to arriving on the island. where he would have protected a waitress from being harassed by some dude, punching his lights out for good measure. The simple reason why this scene was cut was because it would have made him, and by extension the hunters, too sympathetic. Though even in the final film, he still comes across as better than Nick.
The predators don't hunt when they're not hungry.
No, only humans do.
Oh, you're breaking our heart.
But what about Nick's accomplice in freeing the dinosaurs, Sarah? She's played by Julianne Moore, who plays the role of a wildlife researcher that has no qualms with getting out in the field, no matter how life-threatening it is. Her relationship with Malcolm is strained, which is why she didn't tell him about going to Sorna. The idea of seeing real dinosaurs and proving her theories was too tempting. I will say she's a little too prettied up for the camera to look the part, especially when you compare the book version of the character, who is described as having a muscular physique that Moore simply doesn't have in this movie. One other downside to her character is, despite coming across as competent in some portions of the movie, she also makes obvious mistakes, like continuing to wear a jacket covered in the blood of a baby T-Rex, which is how the Buck and Doe Rexes are able to track her down. Keep this in mind, in the book, Sarah more or less took charge of the team when things started going wrong, being a mentor to the character Kelly, who in the film has been reimagined as Malcolm's daughter.
Wait a minute, one daughter?
Got any kids?
Me? Oh, hell yeah, 3. I love kids.
What's with this idiot and numbers?
Okay, we got to address this. The worst part about the Nostalgia Critic's review of The Lost World has got to be his weird hatred of Jeff Goldblum.
It's hard to imagine anyone disliking a charismatic actor like Goldblum, but the critic is one such person. He and his brother exaggerate the ums and uhs in Goldblum's line delivery, which compared to the first Jurassic Park feels toned down here in The Lost World. A lot of Malcolm's lines that the critic finds annoying are some of the best lines in the movie.
Sarah! Sarah Harding! How many Sarahs do you think are on this island?
He twists the facts about the movie to make it sound like Malcolm is an idiot, as well as inventing plot holes in the film that aren't actually plot holes. Kelly's introduction is one such instance. At no point does the movie state Kelly is Malcolm's only child. She is simply the only one we see in this movie. The critic also thinks the personal drama between Malcolm, Sarah, and Kelly is a failing on the movie's part, calling it filler until the fucking T-Rex gets here, rather than an intentional character flaw. Sarah and Kelly have plenty of dialogue about how Malcolm hasn't come through for them in the past, and this movie is him trying to actually be responsible to the people he loves by prioritizing getting them off the island. He almost died in the original movie, and so Sorna is the last place he wants Sarah and Kelly to be.
There's also this part which I scoffed at immediately.
I guess like most women, she just wanted to get as far away from Jeff Goldblum as possible.
Excuse me? Have you seen what Goldblum looks like in The Fly? Do you not understand women at all?
I wonder if the critic would have preferred it if Malcolm's role in this movie was more like the book, where his injuries from the first Jurassic Park reopen and he has to spend the rest of the story being carried around by the other characters while high on drugs. It was Crichton's way of satirizing how sequels reuse elements from the original. In fact, let's talk about the book for a second. 3 characters from the novel on the good guy's side are absent from this movie. Nick is an original character, there's no Rex Rampage in San Diego, and then there's the antagonists, who were wildly different from the hunters we see in this film. Rather than the organized team with dozens of people with lots of equipment, it was 3 unarmed people. Lewis Dodgson, the man who hired Nedry to steal the dinosaur embryos in the original Jurassic Park.
Dodgson! We've got Dodgson here!
Along with 2 cronies. And oh boy, do they come across as superfluous, spending most of the story separated from the protagonists, who know they're on the island but don't take them seriously. And Dodgson's team is so ill-equipped to handle the dangers of the island, they get themselves killed, with Sarah being the only one of the main characters who interact with them. They are a problem that mostly resolves itself. The hunters in the film are definitely an improvement in terms of participating in the plot. Yes, the greater numbers are a means of having more on-screen deaths, but those of us who have read the book can't overlook one little advantage Ludrow has over Dodgson.
At least we came prepared.
That description of the book's antagonist is a microcosm of how different the novel and movie handle the story. The novel focused mostly on interacting with the dinosaurs the protagonists were studying. An iconic scene from the book involves the characters in a worker village being stalked by a pair of camouflaging Carnotauruses. It's a tense scene, though in the movie the characters are attacked by raptors instead, no doubt because of how popular they became after the first movie. although I'm surprised the filmmakers didn't go with camouflaging dinosaurs in order to save costs, especially when you consider the more rapid pace the movie starts having in the last 40 minutes or so. It's still full of memorable moments all throughout, but we zip through them quickly with little to no transition between scenes. Scenes such as Ajay's death, which was possibly filmed but cut from the movie and its deletion is noticeable. Roland's last scene where he mourns Ajay would have had a greater impact if we actually saw it. Funny how a death scene that was forced to happen off screen because of behind-the-scenes trouble happened both here as well as to Samuel L. Jackson's character in the first movie. The first hour or so of The Lost World was decently paced with a lot of foreshadowing, like the hunter who zaps a compy and is later eaten by a swarm of them, Sarah having a lucky pack that is able to save her from death on at least 2 occasions, Kelly having been cut from her school's gymnastics team, which has this as payoff. Yeah, I don't know why people, including the Nostalgia Critic, hate this moment. They act like it comes out of nowhere when it was definitely foreshadowed. It's a little over the top, but doesn't feel too out of place in a series that includes things like this. That said, things start moving very quickly after the protagonists and hunters start traveling together. It isn't long before they're separated by the raptors, and then very quickly we find ourselves off Sorna and in San Diego, where the Buck Rex goes on a little rampage, eating the film's screenwriter David Koepp. So if you have a problem with the writing in this movie, you can at least take some satisfaction in this part. The San Diego climax is entertaining. It's like an updated take on the original Lost World from 1925.
Not the first vintage film reference either. The ship that brings the T-Rex Buck to San Diego is called the Venture, the same name as the ship from King Kong. While this moment comes straight out of the 1960s film The Valley of Gwangi.
But I would be lying if I said it didn't feel rushed. It seems most Jurassic Park movies change the originally intended ending during production, and The Lost World is no different. Different versions of the script had the characters escape on helicopters, only to have one last action scene where they're attacked by pteranodons. Taking the Rex to San Diego was a later addition, and unfortunately it shows. I like it, but it could have been better handled. A plot point that is outright dropped is investigating how the dinosaurs are even still alive. Early on, something called a lysine contingency is established. In simple terms, this means they should have died out because their food source was tainted with lysine, but were still alive after 4 years. The novel ended on the revelation of the lysine contingency, making the dinosaurs going extinct again a foregone conclusion. Half the reason Hammond wanted a team to go to the island in the movie was to find out how the dinosaurs were thriving on Sorna, and we get no answers.
Here's a criticism that the Nostalgia Critic easily could have come up with himself, but instead decided to focus way too much on calling the characters idiots and saying dumb things like, the effects aren't as good as they were in the first movie.
That is one big pile of shit.
In truth, I'm surprised by how well the practical effects in this movie hold up. I know the first compy in the opening scene is a puppet being moved on wires, but it moves around in a convincing way. And this carries over in the larger animatronics. You feel bad for the animals the hunters capture because of their lifelike movement, and the Rexes are scary during the scene where they ambush the trailers, and especially the waterfall scene. The filmmakers get a lot of mileage out of the baby Rex. When it comes to the CG, it's dated, but when compared to the first Jurassic Park, I'm going to have to say, no, this is an improvement. It helps that most of the CGI shots were filmed at night. It's only really during the daytime scenes when it starts to look sketchy. To the film's benefit, there's a lot of mixing of practical and CGI effects, especially when we are first introduced to the hunters. But I can't talk about the upsides of this movie without mentioning the music. Every Jurassic Park movie has epic music thanks to John Williams' score. There's the main theme, of course, but the theme that plays when the characters travel around Sorna is quite memorable. I don't think I can play much of it for copyright reasons, but it's music that I've never forgotten. Different dinosaurs have different musical cues, creating a balance of awe-inspiring and terrifying tones when they're used. Hopefully I've made my case about this movie being better than the Nostalgia Critic says it is. It's not his worst hot take, but it's one of the first ones I saw, and I'm glad I finally got the chance to get this off my chest.
The first 2 Jurassic Park movies are something I watched on repeat many times as a child, and the subject of my next review is going to be a remake of a video game that I played just as frequently. Sorry, did I say remake? I meant to say... Reignition? I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you are as well.
Nick?